telescope with our risk list in Chapter 8. But before we get there, we need to identify some of the common but unnecessary risks that trip us up. Because risk is what's ultimately holding you back from pursuing your dream. We're going to clear them out of the way so that you can start closing the gap between your day job and your dream job. The problem with perfection. When things were out of control in my room on Edgewood Drive in Hudson, Massachusetts, my mom would ask me to clean up. I didn't tidy or make my bed. I didn't put the obvious piles of dirty laundry in the right room or clean off my desk. I always tried to go from a messy room to operating room cleanliness in one afternoon. I didn't merely pick up books off the floor. I dusted the shelf slowly and rearranged them by size or author name or both. I spent hours and hours on a 2-foot square in my room, wanting everything to be perfect. About midway through, I would get overwhelmed at the task and give up. My mom called me a procrastinating perfectionist. I would wait until the last minute and then try to do it all perfectly and at once. And maybe you think that way too. The goal of this book is to get you to do what you love with the life you already have. But there's a chance you feel like you've missed some of your opportunity. Whether you're 17 or 47, there's always the temptation to think that something has passed us by. And now that we feel a little buzz to get things going, now that we feel a little momentum starting to build, it's easy to get a touch of procrastinating perfectionism, and that tends to cripple our ability to finish. I want us to be a generation of finishers. I want us to be a generation of people who follow through and sew the last stitch, or give the final keynote, or write the last chapter. And in order to get there, we have to murder perfectionism. I was going to put perfectionism to bed, but that sounded too tender for this particular monster. Murder feels right. How do we do that? There are a number of ways. Books like Getting Things Done by David Allen are great at helping you get organized and in motion. Men's magazines offer monthly tips on productivity with the least effort expended. But I tend to think that the simpler I keep my tools, the more likely I am to actually use them. And there's one idea that really changed the way I looked at perfectionism. Bumping into this truth radically rewired my ability to finish. Here's what I learned. 90% perfect and shared with the world always changes more lives than 100% perfect and stuck in your head. That's it. I admit it's simple, but it's also true. The things you create and share will always outperform the things that stay stuck in your head or your desk or your laptop. You might love the ideas you have inside you. You might be more proud of them than any other project you've ever put together. But if you don't follow through with them, they don't do much good. The business that is open will always outsell the business that is closed. If your goal is to change the world, you have to step out and share your work. And sometimes that means getting comfortable with A- work. I learned that while working on my blog, stuffchristianslike.net. I used to kill myself on each post. I would write and rewrite each one, trying to perfectly craft what I wanted to say. It's so easy to misinterpret something online, and I wanted my messages to be clear. It was tempting to hold off on posts until they were perfect. But 7 a.m. comes at the same time every day, and people expected a post from me. Not a perfect post, a great post. If I wanted to impact someone that day, if I wanted to change the way they thought about something, I had to share what I wrote, even if I thought it was only 90% done. Even if I thought a little more work could make it perfect. Because that's the lie of perfectionism, isn't it? We never tell ourselves the land of perfect is about a year away. We never think perfect is impossible. Perfect always glows from right around the corner. We just need a little more work, a little more time, and then we can share our work with the world. I'm afraid the land of perfect is a myth. We might feel we are skirting its borders with our dream, but the reality is that those borders don't exist because perfect doesn't. Your definition of perfect will not fit mine, which will not fit hers or his. You can't catch perfect, but you can catch published. You can catch finished and shared. That's not an excuse to do your work half-heartedly. I want you to be excellent at passion, not just passionate. But since industry rules say that the vast majority of us don't read beyond page 18 in books, and you've made it this far, chances are good you struggle with perfectionism more than doing things half-heartedly. The solution to doing something lackadaisically is not difficult. Just do it better. The solution to perfectionism is tricky because at first it doesn't feel like something that needs to be solved. At first you get lauded for your attention to detail or commitment to excellence. But what a lot of people don't see are the extra hours you're putting in to make sure something is perfect. Perfectionism seems like a character trait sometimes, not a flaw. People don't normally see it as the poison it is until someone burns out or has a breakdown. I look at starting any endeavor kind of like swimming. You can read all the books you want about swimming. You can participate in blogs about swimming and buy magazines and study videos of swimming online for hours and hours. But if you waited until you were perfect at understanding swimming before you started swimming, you might never get in the water. And you'd never learn how to be a swimmer because you have to get wet a lot first. Quit perfect. It's an unnecessary obstacle. Chase the idea of your dream being better finished at 90% than perfect and not pursued. The flip side of this idea is something I experienced with the recording of the audiobook. We initially recorded the audiobook and we're close to being finished. We were 40 pages away from done. And somebody I work with listened to it and said, "Hey, I think we could do a better job. I think we should re-record the whole thing." And my first reaction was no, because it's a lot of weird, hard work to record an audiobook. And I didn't want to start over. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized they were right. And I was rushing in that moment toward done instead of great. So we recorded the whole thing again, and I'm so glad we did. So don't think that when I say 90% and published is what matters, and think that that just means get done, because I don't think done is the destination we want to hit. I think great is where we want to hit, and that's a different place. So in my own life, I really try to keep that in mind, that I'm not going to strive for perfect, and I'm not going to strive for done. I'm going to try to land right there on great. Death to this discussion. Morning John used to hate Night John. That's how I thought of each day in my head. When Morning John would get up to go to work, he'd be exhausted and worn out before the day even really started. Why? Because Night John was an irresponsible jerk. He never thought about anyone but himself. He was always staying up late and watching the real-world marathons or reading sports online, and then would finally collapse into bed when he was too exhausted to keep his eyes open, thus screwing Morning John out of a productive day. That's how I used to think, mostly because I hated mornings, but also because I'm weird. But as tired as I was each morning, there was one thing that wrecked my ability to follow my dream, to move, if you will, each day. It wasn't my lack of sleep or lack of desire. It was the discussion between the other two Johns in my life. Every time I sat down at my laptop to write my book or my blog, I would have a discussion inside my head. It usually went like this. Today, John. I think I'll write some today. Today is a good day to hammer out a few ideas. Later, John. I agree with you almost. I think you should definitely write some. You should just do it later. You'll be able to be far more creative and productive later. Do you even feel like writing right now? Today, John. I'm a little tired, but yeah, I think I could write today. Later, John. You should write, but you know, there's a lot of other stuff on your to-do list. There's a load of other obligations you need to take care of first. What if we compromise? You do a few items on your list, and then write later. Today, John. Okay, but I am definitely going to write a ton later. Later, John. Without a doubt, we are going to be so productive later. Back and forth I went with myself over and over again, losing the majority of those discussions. Why? Because we know how to talk ourselves out of or into things better than anyone on the planet. Think about a time when you made a horrible mistake and someone said, "What were you thinking?" Usually, you weren't doing it because you thought it would be a horrible mistake. You thought it would be great, and you talked yourself into it. Because no one can convince us like we can convince us. So when you sit down to do whatever it is you feel called to do, one of the other main obstacles you'll have to face is the discussion. It's annoying and tricky and sly. It ruins more dreams than just about anything else on the planet. But there is a way to beat it. There is a way to stop it. And the best way to do that, the best way to crush the discussion, is with a decision. If your desire is to read one book on parenting every week because your dream is being the best parent possible, decide on a time to do that. Decide that every morning at 7 o'clock, you'll read for 30 minutes, and decide that once for the entire month. Then, on day 4, when doubt creeps in and the discussion fires up, say to yourself, "Oh, I wish you had been around earlier. We already decided to read at 7 a.m. I'd love to discuss this with you, but we've already made our decision. Thanks." Like an unruly employee at a store who says, "Sorry, I just work here." You then get back to work. You write or read or jog or do a million other things that are no longer up for discussion. You might need to do this every day at first. We all get a little addicted to the discussion because it keeps us from being brave. We get comfortable with losing to the discussion over and over again. Victory will feel a little weird at first, but the goal is to make your decision once a month and then once a year. The energy and time you'll save not spent tangling in the discussion can be dramatic. Discussing whether or not to create something each day is exhausting. Each time you lose, it gets a little harder to win next time. So decide once, and then just do it. Death to the discussion obstacle. The fuzzy math of what if. Secretly, I always thought I could be a writer. That was a passion that I always felt I was capable of executing on. And I really felt that way strongly because I had never tried. There was nothing to prove me wrong. I had a head full of imagination and a life devoid of experiences that told me otherwise. I used to smugly read book reviews or see people online who had written books and followed my same dream and think to myself, I could do that if I really wanted to. It's such a toxic phrase, if I really wanted to. It's a get out of jail free card. It's not my lack of ability that is holding me back. It's my lack of desire. I could be awesome if I really wanted to. I could run a marathon if I really wanted to. I could go back to school if I really wanted to. We say that phrase when we want to shift the blame for our dream not coming true. It's not that we can't, it's that we won't. And won't is a word that speaks to our will. Can't, on the other hand, is a word that speaks to our skill. By saying, if I really wanted to, we are able to maintain the appearance of having enough skill to follow our dream. This path eventually leads to a curious place, apathy. Apathy seems like a good friend at times. It's familiar. We've not cared about other things before. Why not care about one more thing? It's also much easier than caring, at first. Apathy is almost effortless and grows in quiet places that don't require a lot of tending or maintenance. And for a while, apathy is a lot less terrifying than opportunity. Apathy is a good friend when an opportunity stares you in the face and you're afraid to actually find out what would happen if you tried to follow through with a dream job or a desire. And it's a good friend because something weird happens when we step out for a big adventure. We start to ask ourselves the what if questions. What if I try and I fail and it turns out I'm not really a writer after all? What if we have kids and I'm a horrible mother? What if I start my own business and it turns out all these years I've been wrong about being a great entrepreneur? In those moments, we become obsessed with the fear of finding out who we are not. It reminds me of how Matt Damon's character describes why he is a murderous imposter in the movie The Talented Mr. Ripley. He says, I always thought it'd be better to be a fake somebody than a real nobody. Apathy is ultimately about being a fake somebody. We're afraid of finding out what we're really made of, so instead we end up making no decision because neutral is safe. We think that if we don't do anything, we won't make the wrong decision. But not doing anything is its own decision, and the odds of failure are horrible. Let's pretend that you decide to pursue your dream job with all your heart. Let's say that, like me, you put all the chips in and move your family and change jobs and end relationships and start new ones in a new state. 5 years later, you look back on the decision, and either it worked or it didn't. There will be shades of differentiation in there, but for the most part, you'll either have succeeded, you made the right decision, or failed, you made the wrong decision. So you have roughly 50% odds of things working out. But nobody fears just making the wrong decision. Through the kaleidoscope, we fear the worst possible outcome we can imagine. a series of interrelated failures, a spider web of screw-ups that collapses our entire being. When I play that game, I go from mistake to hobo on the streets in about 5 minutes. I imagine losing my job in some sort of spectacular way that prevents me from ever finding gainful employment again. I don't just get blacklisted in one industry. I manage to get barred from every industry on the planet. My family would leave me too because I'd be a hobo and they wouldn't want to be part of my new drifter lifestyle, riding the rails and whatnot. I'd kick around the Pacific Northwest and try to become a glassblower or something, but that wouldn't work either. Ultimately, I'd fall apart and people would use me as a cautionary tale of extreme potential gone to extreme waste. The chances of that happening, of you or me really wasting our lives to that degree, are very, very slim. They're probably 1%. Maybe 2% if you already know a guy who's into glassblowing and lives in the Pacific Northwest. Now let's say that your fear of answering what if is massive. You're paralyzed by it, and in order to avoid it, you don't make any decision about pursuing your dream. You now have a 100% chance of your dream not coming to fruition. People who do not attempt to recover their dreams fail 100% of the time. So you have a 2% chance of horrific failure if you try, and a 100% chance if you don't. Those are horrible odds, but maybe I over-exaggerated and 2% is incredibly low. Let's pretend there's a 50% chance that your worst failure comes to fruition. Those odds are still better than not trying at all. You might fail. By recovering your dream and running with it, risk runs with you. You could fall flat on your face. But I'd accept that risk 1,000 times before I accepted the guarantee of failure of not trying. Do the math and don't make the fear of failure an insurmountable obstacle. We are too busy to pursue our dreams. I make it a point not to complain about my life around people who have more than 5 kids. If you have one of those economy vans that prisons use to transfer convicts, and if you have established a precise system to put on shoes at your house, chances are good you're busier than I am. I didn't realize this principle until we had our second kid and discovered that having 2 kids is exponentially harder than having 1. Don't get me wrong. When we had our first daughter, Ellie, I thought we were busy. I'm sure I complained to people about being deprived of sleep and overworked. But then we had a second kid and things got crazy. Suddenly we went from zone defense to man-to-man. That's when we got busy. But that's okay, because busy is a bit of a badge of honor these days. And so many of us wear that badge. And we are busy. We work longer hours than previous generations. Harvard economist Juliet P. Shore, in her book The Overworked American, estimates that the average employed person is now on the job an additional 163 hours, or the equivalent of 1 month a year, compared to figures from 20 years ago. And trying to fit a dream into that already rabid schedule seems impossible, if not foolish. So we comfort ourselves by saying, I'd pursue my dream if I had time. I wrestled with that excuse when I wrote my first book. I wasn't the first person to turn a blog into a book. In fact, my inspiration, Christian Lander, had already turned his blog Stuff White People Like into one. So had a lot of other bloggers, and there was a bit of a pattern established. Sign huge book deal. Quit job. Stop writing blog for a while. Hole yourself up in a moody-looking apartment. Write book. But I didn't receive a massive advance. I couldn't quit my 40-hour-a-week job. On top of that, I had freelance clients for whom I had to write dozens of projects. I had 2 kids who were not about to accept a parenting hiatus for 3 months while I worked on a book. And the most difficult part was that I couldn't stop writing my blog. So every day I had to double the amount of content I was creating, writing a post for the blog and a chapter for the book. I was busy. So are you. You've got commitments and jobs and kids and a dog and a spouse or significant other. You've got in-laws or neighbors and a BlackBerry that won't shut up, and morning meetings and lunchtime workouts and evening commitments. You've got a second or maybe even a third job. And into that maelstrom, some punk kid who turned a blog into a book is telling you you're not too busy to chase your dream. Only that's not what I'm saying. I believe you're busy. I do. But there's something I believe even more. You have the perfect amount of time each day for the things that matter most. The key is spending time on those things. Few would boldly declare, today, Watching television for 2 hours was one of the most important things I needed to get done. Yet that's where we sometimes spend our entire evenings. The operative word in the phrase, enough time, is not time. It's enough. And the truth you should accept is that you will probably never have enough time to pursue your dream. But every day, somebody somewhere is making magic with the less than enough time he has. So can you, if you stop focusing on the amount of time you have and start focusing on the amount of tasks that really matter. You will never happen upon a productivity tip that increases your ability to get things done so dramatically that you have too much time on your hands. You might be too bored to work on your dream, but just don't buy into the lie that you are too busy. The money problem. It kills me when I hear people equating financial foolishness with being committed to their dream. We decided to go for broke. We canceled Christmas for a couple of years and sold our kids' toys in a big garage sale. We then pawned my wife's wedding ring. Finally, we lost our house. That's how much the dream meant to me. That's ridiculous. Mortgaging your future isn't a sign of faithfulness to a dream. It's a sign of foolishness. If you're not careful and buy into the lie that in order to go for broke, you have to go broke, you'll turn your dream into a demon. Money will become a high-walled border around your dream if you don't control it. It will limit what you can do and when you can do it, like a barbed wire fence at a prison. If you can control it, though, money can be a strong, stable place to jump from. I experienced both sides of the equation. When I was young, I made really stupid decisions with money. I took out a loan to buy a mountain bike. I forgot to pay a health care bill that went to collections and wrecked my credit for years. I bought an expensive new car and had no savings plan whatsoever. Years later, the collective mistakes caught up with me. I was unable to work on my dream for years because I needed to take freelance writing jobs in addition to my day job in order to get out from the hole I dug. I lost the freedom to say no and had to take on some less than perfect clients. I wanted to write books and work on my dream projects, but my weeknights and weekends were filled with freelance work. Eventually, years after reading my employer's book, The Total Money Makeover, and hustling on freelance, we got rid of our credit cards. We paid off our car loan. We paid off item after item until only our home mortgage remained. I didn't know it at the time, but we weren't just paying our bills. We were removing financial obstacles from the runway of our dream. When we did so, money became something that didn't prevent our dream, but actually funded it. We had saved enough to take low-paying speaking gigs in order to get better at speaking. We had enough in the bank for me to say no to freelance projects that would have eaten up dream time. Money is certainly a legitimate obstacle to your ability to pursue your dream job, but it doesn't have to be. I'm biased because I work for Dave Ramsey and love the Financial Peace University classes, but regardless of the path you take, get control of your finances if you really want the freedom to pursue your dream well. If you approach money the right way, it will fund and fuel your dream, not curb it. 2 of the worst words ever. I hate the words buy now. Not separately. I've never had a problem with buy when it's on its own or supporting another sentence. I have no issue with stuff Christians like, buy Jon Acuff. It performs admirably in that example. And now is a fine word too. Short, rhymes with cow, often the place people encourage you to live. I got nothing but love for now. But when those 2 words team up and hit the town together, fist pumping and drinking the night away, they become something entirely different. They are not peanut butter and chocolate together at last. They are orange juice and gasoline. Helpful in isolation, napalm collectively. The problem is that by now is a phrase we say to ourselves when we're trying to believe the lie that it's too late to start pursuing our dream. As we survey our lives and stand on the edge of the possibility cliff, we start to say things like, if I were really going to be a high school teacher, by now I would have already had a few years of teaching experience. If I were going to be a musician, by now I'd be better at the guitar. If I were going to be a pastor, by now I would have gone to seminary. The goal of the phrase, by now, is to offer yourself a twisted justification that, indeed, you could have been what you wanted to be, but alas, you're too late. The tricky thing is that by now isn't age specific. You'll tell yourself this at 25 or 55. And if you convince yourself of this, you will also believe the next lie, which is, don't start. The window of opportunity has closed. The ship has sailed while I was busy working or parenting or paying off student loans. It's too late. Don't start. Don't let the phrase "by now" in. Like the vampires in the first Corey Haim film, Lost Boys, the only Lost Boys film I officially recognize, it can only come in if you invite it. Just to jump off script for a second, one of the ideas that I wrestle with sometimes is when I'll compare the start of an adventure for me to somebody else's later chapter. And by that I mean, for instance, I was on the radio with Dave Ramsey, and I was sitting in that studio, and I was so nervous, and I was so awkward, and I just don't feel like I'm good at that. And watching him, he's such a master at that, and I felt like I'm playing basketball with Michael Jordan. And so when I go in that moment, I get tense, and the "by now" lie starts up, and I talked to his producer, Blake, and I said, wow, how does he do it? How does he do 3 hours of that? That's really hard to me. And Blake said, you're looking at the end of a 17-year career. He's been working on this for 17 years. And the great temptation to us dreamers is that we'll take the start of our career and compare it to somebody who's done it for 2 years or for 10 years or for 2 decades. So if you're a writer, you'll look at your first book and go, my first book is nowhere near that other author's first book. And it's really not their first book, it's their 5th book or their 10th book. So be really careful with the "by now" lie to not compare yourself to other people who have worked a long time on their craft and you're just beginning. It's okay to go slowly. It's okay to get better at it. What if I do the wrong thing? I wish there were a chapter in this book entitled Wicked Big Confidence, and it was easier to write than this one about obstacles. But it wouldn't be true to my experience. And if it were true of yours, and you were already brimming with a billboard-sized belief in your abilities and a perfect plan for your dream, you probably wouldn't be listening to this book. You'd be on a yacht with Carmen Electra, a wheelbarrow of Lucky Charms, and a full-size Galaga arcade machine. That is what I assumed would happen for me when I was in the 9th grade. But the fear of doing what we're called to do comes in a Baskin-Robbins assortment of disgusting flavors, and one of them is the question, what if I do the wrong thing? I'm working through this one right now. 7 months ago, I left the stability of an IT job at a massive company in Atlanta. It wasn't speeding me in the direction of my dream job, but it was consistent and safe. I loved my boss and the people I worked with. I had a steady salary and got to do a lot of the stuff I dreamed about on the side of my job, in the corners of life. Openly, I questioned what it would be like to do what I love full time, but not enough to actually do something about it. Then Dave Ramsey pulled me aside and made me a ridiculous offer. I had just finished speaking to his team of roughly 300 people at a weekly meeting. I'd driven up from Atlanta, expecting to maybe have a casual meeting with one of his team leaders about doing some freelance work. My expectations were low. After I was done speaking, Dave asked me to stick around and have a conversation. I consider him a celebrity, but still tried to play it cool and act like I regularly had big conversations like this in fancy conference rooms with comfortable chairs. My cover was almost blown when Dave's assistant walked in and said, Dave, you have to call Tony Dungy in 5 minutes. Now that I'm a thousandaire, I'd probably say, tell Dungy we'll call him back later. He's not even an active NFL coach anymore. But those were humbler days back then, and I physically constrained myself from letting out an audible, whoa. Dave told me he was looking for new message bearers with new messages. He wanted to find people he could pour decades of leadership wisdom into. This wasn't a job offer. This is a